quite a double bill now with Cloverfield and Cabin in the Woods. Now this is two horror films that both did pretty well. Both were made by former TV writers becoming directors. Both moved on to do other films. And they both came out and were actually quite original for what they were, for what people expected from them. And they both have held up pretty well since they were made. And I've watched both recently. So, they are different, they are very different in scale. But they are kind of lower budget. For the first studio releases, they are lower budget. And they do have like one or two actors who became big afterwards. But they still quite low budget. And they both had famous people, famous like producers on them, who also were involved in the writing. So Cloverfield was produced by J.J. Abrams, who's a director who makes very variable quality of films. But as a producer, he's done some really good stuff. He tends to be much more solid as a producer. And then you've got Joss Whedon, who's recently a massive fall from grace, who co-wrote this, and produced it as well. And you can see the stamps on both the stamps in these films, but also these are directors the directors also moved on from them. So Cloverfield first, that was the first release. What is Cloverfield was a big thing. It's basically what is the Matrix redone. What is the Matrix now? What's Cloverfield? Cloverfield was a weird name for a monster that is in this film. This is basically a monster movie. This is basically what would happen if you do a Godzilla film, but you stuck completely with the people who weren't in the army. They're just people trying to survive. So the whole film is done as a recording, as something that someone took because they were recording a party when the outbreak took place, and how these people survived for a very long time before the inevitable deaths occurred. So it's like what would happen if you followed some side character who gets about a minute screen time in a typical Godzilla movie. What if you followed them throughout the entire movie? That's basically what it is. But it works really well. It worked so much better than the American Godzilla movie, which also took place in New York. It also had this kind of malformed monster trash in New York during the night. It's pretty much the same setup, but it's like this is a much better version of. This is like, okay, what if we followed these kind of young people who are trying to make their careers, who are a bit overly cynical, a bit, nasty to each other. What if you watch them? I mean, that's the basic setup. But I should also, something I forgot to mention was Drew Goddard, who wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods, also was one of the writers on Cloverfield. But Matt Reeves directed Cloverfield. I forgot to mention it. As I was talking, I was like, oh, I forgot to mention that. So there is a link between them. Because Drew Goddard was a TV writer for J.J. Abrams and Joss Whedon. But Matt Reeves directed it. Matt Reeves also went on to do Let the Right One In remake. Then he did the two of the Planet Apes movies. He's currently doing Batman. So he's done a bunch of movies. But he's now become much more successful and he's writing his own movies now. This one he was director, but you could tell someone in charge of it. He was probably much in charge of the script as well as they worked out what they need to do. But it is a kind of handheld film. But it's one of the less annoying handheld films. Although at the time people hated the handheld quality of it, because it was hard to see the monster and stuff. But actually, because I watched it on the projector on the big screen, it actually works pretty well because they don't overdo it. It's like sometimes it's there to actually pace up the idea of how scared they are, and the camera goes a bit weird sometimes. But they shoot it so you always know what's going on, but also it's a kind of almost another character, really, in this sense of the panic sometimes. And it's just the seeing how people separate and isolate themselves within a difficult situation. And there's this sense of this camera's just the observer. So T.J. Miller plays a guy who's holding the camera, so you get his voice a lot of the time. You also get him interacting. In a way it suggests he was always on set. And they're interacting. All the other actors are pretty unknown, really. I mean, there were a lot of the actors you'll never see again. Well, Lizzie Kaplan was in this, but she was the actress who came out of this and was pretty much got a lot of the big parts because she's the best character. But all the actors are fine. It's just that they're meant to be normal people. It's not actors trying to be like give great dramatic performance. They're panicking most of the time, and they're playing people who are very flawed and very kind of vague 20-somethings that don't really know what they want from life and things. So it's not like you're asked to deal with people who you might find annoying at times. Which I actually quite liked what the film is. These are people just panicking, not knowing what they're doing. They're not stupid though, they just don't always make the best choices. But you like them well enough. And as you go through the story, things happen to them and they get beaten up by life a lot. I mean, we lose one of the main characters pretty early, and it tells you, okay, you're going to lose some of these people. And as you go on, the cast is whittled down a bit because it's a monster movie. Like, some people are going to die. But you like the characters well enough so that you're sad when you see them go. No one jumps out as being amazing, but you like them, they're likeable. But it's more about the atmosphere of this world. Of this world that's collapsing around them and how they're all panicking, how clumsy they are dealing with their emotions as they deal with each other, and which feels kind of credible is the idea is if you have things that if you're going to think you're going to die that night, you're trying to tell people something, you're probably not going to do it in the best possible way. And there's some nasty moments to monsters, like someone's head explodes at some point, which is quite nice and nasty and lots of blood. And Statue of Liberty's head collapses in the street at one point and just pops down because it's been knocked off its bearings. And city streets are trashed. People are raiding shops and trying to get stuff. And people try to leave the city. There's just like non-stop panic behaviour throughout. And as the film goes on, people start to... the streets start to get emptier as people either dead or they've moved out. And there is a really nice sequence in towards the end where they have to go up this one building, then cross over to another building that's on its side, leading into that building to save the girlfriend of the lead character because she's injured there. And that's a really nice suspense sequence. It's done so much better than anything that was done in that Poseidon Adventure remake. And there's lots of nice scenes like that, and just there's a lot of sense of impending doom, but it's never overdone. Everything feels kind of chaotic, but also feels like people just try to survive in a bad situation. It just really works really well as a film. It's solid. It just delivers what you want from a monster movie. And if you don't like the kind of shaky cam, well, don't watch it. Watch another movie. It's like, from the publicity what it is. So you either go with it or you don't. It's a short movie as well, so you don't feel you're bogged down by watching a film that's too long. It is just a really well-made genre film that isn't for everybody, but it's a really good basis for a director. The second one I'm talking about, Cabin in the Woods, is the one I like more, but I like Cloverfield too. It's just that I just prefer this one because it's a bit wittier. Even though the Cabin in the Woods is basically... There's a lot of tropes that are very Joss Whedon-y that now look a bit creepy if you see what's happened to him in the last couple of years. And that interview he did with his New York Times or something, that magazine article recently that was like, oh. So it makes you kind of look at one or two of the characters and think, oh, that's a kind of trope that's aged really badly and, is now kind of on par with Woody Allen and his liking for the underage girls in his films early on. It's that kind of thing as like young girls in Woody Allen film. Now this one is like a certain type of girl that we started with Buffy that now looks a bit more suspect the more you know about his life. So that's the kind of thing that kind of hurts the film a little bit. But it's well made though. Drew Goddard directed it and co-wrote it. And he's gone on to do another he wrote The Martian. He's written a film that starred Chris Hemsworth and John Hamm and Jeff Bridges, all taking place as one hotel, which is quite good but not great. But it's one of those films that you'd see talent, he just needs to focus a bit more. So he is a guy with talent, he just needs a bit more focus. But this is a really well made film. But the idea is basically these 5 people go to a cabin in the woods and monsters attack them. At the same time, you're seeing all these people in this underground lair who are actually planning the attacks. And it's like, why are they doing that? So it's a horror movie, but it's also a commentary on a horror movie. An idea of all the different conventions we've got. And it becomes much more about why are these people set these monsters up against these 5 young people. Like, what's actually going on. You've had a chance to see the film. It's 10 years old, so I'm not going to try and do a non-spoiler version. It turns out that this is a ritual sacrifice because there are older gods under the surface of the world, and the only way you can satisfy them and keep them happy is to have like ritual sacrifices made every so often, and this big organisation actually manages it. So it's an old world horror faced up against the new kind of slasher horror. That's really what it is. And it has a down ending. Both these films have down endings. I mean, nobody lives in either of these films. There's one person who lives in Cloverfield, but that's it. Like, everybody gets killed in Cloverfield apart from one person. And this one, nobody survives. The world ends. Everybody dies in this one. So it seems that Drew Goddard likes destroying the world, is the takeaway of this video. But there's lots of fun stuff. You've got the characters who start out seeming one way, but turns out there's other stuff to them. Like Chris Hemsworth in this one, he's the jock. This is one of his other performances before he became Thor. But it turns out he's actually got a brain. There's a guy who smokes weed, who's in his cardigan the whole time. He just conspiracy theorist, and it turns out he's right about everything. But you're meant to ignore him, and it turns out he gets everything right. He's completely right, and he gets much more proactive as the film goes on, as he realises all his paranoid theories are actually true. And that's a nice little turn. The lead actress is nice as well, even though there's conventions in the part that look a bit dodgy now. But she is likeable, and you do like her as she toughens up and gets through this horrible situation. She's got a love interest who dies horribly. There's the bimbo character who also is a brunette who turns blonde, and she starts to become much more of a conventional blonde, conventional character from an 80s horror movie as the film progresses, and it turns out that they've put stuff in her hair dye and things like that. Everyone's getting manipulated by different things to actually act the way the conventions would have them act. Which is a nice little twist on the idea of we need our cliches, we need our simplifications. So all that stuff is going on in the film, and it's all very enjoyable. The actors are good. It's well directed, because another one, this is a very short film. This is like pretty much basically to the point. And just as you're getting bored with one setup, they move it to the next setup. They never keep anything on for too long, so you don't get bored with anything. They vary the action. This is very much in a limited situation, but they keep the character work early. They keep it good. They always come back to the underground, and you get to know the characters who are manipulating it, and you get to know they're basically like people who are middle-aged, and this is their job. You kind of like them, but also they know they're kind of dodgy and they're kind of nasty at times. There's a couple of sitcom cliches in there as well that tell you that these people writing this have come from TV. There's a couple of lazy ones that's like, did they have to do that? But that's minimalised. The joy of it is the monsters, because as the film goes on, you get more and more monsters. And monsters going crazy, and eventually the monsters attack the facility as well and start destroying all these smug people in the most horrible way possible. So it's like a very, very joyful horror movie where the people who are instigators do get their just desserts. All the people who are manipulating the thing get brutalised in horrible ways. It's very enjoyable. It's a very enjoyable film. And it also leads to a finale where you actually find out the reason for it. This is a sacrifice. And Scooter Weaver turns up to do the dialogue and do the master plan of the whole thing. And it leads to a good finale where it's like a case of, do you allow yourself to die to save the world, or do you try and survive a few minutes longer knowing you've doomed the world to death, even though you've destroyed a corrupt situation? And it's a nice downbeat ending. It's very John Carpenter-ish. It's very much in the realm of The Live, of an 80s Carpenter film where the world will end. It's that kind of film, which makes it very likeable. But they're both very likeable films. You know, they're both well done. Definitely recommend seeing both of them. They're both like cult films. Cabin in the Woods is tainted a little bit by the Joss Whedon thing, but in a year or two, who's going to care? Really. We'll move on from whatever the hell he did. But, you know what I mean? It's like, he's kind of toxic now. We'll see how it progresses. But I think the film itself is strong enough to move beyond that. But these are good genre films from the late noughties, early 2010s that are subversive, are different from the normal. They're doing something different from what was popular. And they were both successful. They're both nicely successful, so I'm glad they were made. So I hope you enjoy the video and you should go and watch them because they are well worth a look. Right, bye for now. I'll see you later.